Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of Transformational Astrology. I'm Henry Seltzer, and we have been not hesitating, but pausing these for the last few weeks while we were taking care of some other things. Just got distracted, couldn't do everything. So I'm looking forward to getting you this video of the full moon. It's taking place on the 25th of the month on Thursday this week. And let's go and take a look at the chart. So here's that full moon chart with the TimePassages software. And there's a few things that you want to be looking at here that are quite interesting. And one is, of course, let's not forget, Pluto into Aquarius at 0 degrees of Aquarius. First time that we've seen it back in there since there was that brief period of time when it was in Aquarius previously. And then we've had months where it's been fooling around in the last degrees of Capricorn. Close to the sun in this full moon, and then also, interestingly, the rising point, which is indicated by this mark, at 1 degree of Aries. Now, this is only for the West Coast, where I am, San Francisco I use, but it's right coincident with the 0 Aries mark, so that's kind of interesting too. So that's actually the rising point of this chart for this latitude and longitude of San Francisco. Another thing that we'll want to be paying attention to is that there is a very complete grand cross in this full moon. So we have the sun opposed to the moon at 5 degrees of Aquarius and of Leo. And then we have also at 6 degrees of Taurus, so a perfect square to both, almost 1 degree off, we have Jupiter, and then across from Jupiter we have the new planet Haumea, which is represented by this symbol here. And that is very close to a square with Pluto. It's also squaring the Pluto-Sun midpoint even more closely. And in fact, as part of this grand cross, including the full moon, and including Pluto, and including Jupiter, and including Haumea. So we'll be wanting to take a look at that. Well, that's, just the first glimpse of this. I don't know, everybody knows that Leo is a very active sign. It is interesting that we had the Sun and Pluto crossing into Aquarius at exactly the same time. Back on the 20th, earlier in the day, we had the Sun crossing into the Aquarius sign at 0 degrees of Aquarius. And then we had later that night Pluto crossing in, so we had the Sun and Pluto both at 0 degrees at the same moment of their entrance into Aquarius, which is a really interesting coincidence. It does lend weight to this new Aquarian situation with Pluto, the Aquarian sign with Pluto. And, it's interesting, too, that kind of dovetails with also what we call the age of Aquarius. So in terms of a different way of looking at things, in terms of a sidereal basis, in terms of the fact that the precession of the equinox indicates that the rising, the equinoctial point has moved backwards from where it was in Aries almost all one whole sign, 2,000 years since the time of just about the 0 BC mark was when it was lined up with 0 degrees of Aries. Now, having moved all the way back through Pisces, and we talk about the Piscean age as the age of Christianity. In fact, Christianity has been represented by the fish. That's one of the symbols. And he was said to be a fisher. He talked to the disciples, I'm going to make you fishers of men. And the idea of the water and the idea of the 2 fishes in the constellation, all of this is very significant in the question of what was that age like? And that age was very much about the beyond. It was very much about do the right thing and you'll get your reward in heaven. Don't worry about so much what's happening here on earth. In this life, wait till the next. Well, or the next transition stage when you go to heaven, let's say. Well, things are different in this viewpoint of the Aquarian age, which we've been working toward. Now we have a much more humanitarian viewpoint. We want heaven on earth. We are far from that. And that's one of the situations that we're in a transition point. And the old methods of faith just aren't holding their weight anymore. So that we do need new models of spirit to carry us forward. And that's one of the great things about astrology. Astrology is a kind of a timeless method of looking into things, seeing where the planets align, seeing how that represents what's happening in the moment, what's happening at the time of birth of an individual. And this is a very mystical situation. We have the planetary archetypes just according to their positions in the sky, as you know. We are looking at those on the basis of the physical bodies of these planets, including even new planets, new discoveries in this 21st century in terms of planets. And we are seeing those archetypes as representative from the planets in their orbits, just the way they are lined up. And it's a very mystical basis. I'm very fond of saying astrology can't possibly work according to the, let's say, 19th century physics that we have been living under. We still have that same notion of things. We're not really in the modern physics yet in terms of the way we see the world around us. We see it in very materialistic terms. And the logical understanding of things, the scientific method, which has gotten us so far in terms of technology as a culture, unfortunately, it leaves the mystical right out of the picture. And so we have so many people not thinking that there's anything else going on, thinking you get as many toys as you can and then you die and that's it. And that's not exactly the way it is it? So we really need to understand that there is a mystical basis, that you could call it spirit, you could call it the universe, you could call it God, whatever you want to call it, or goddess, whatever you want to call it, there is a mystical basis for things and there is something guiding us. And that's really important to recognize. And I believe that astrology does provide an opportunity for us to see the mystical side in action. So it's very important. That's one reason that I created the TimePassages software, to demonstrate that astrology works, and then what follows from that is your mind almost breaks open at the thought of that, because it's not logical. It's beyond logic is the way I see things. Now, speaking of the 21st century planets, I pioneered the use of Eris as a feminine warrior for soul intention, going to depth within the psyche, and that's becoming more and more accepted now. And we can see Eris in this configuration. Interestingly, at the time of the new moon, which was at 20 degrees of Capricorn, and the next new moon is going to be at 20 degrees of Aquarius, we do have a very interesting pattern here, because the midpoint between Chiron and Eris is right around 20 degrees. If you look, and you can see, you have to kind of eyeball it, but you can see that there's 9 degrees, so you'd add 4.5 because halfway through, and that gets you to 20 degree mark, 20 something. So very interestingly, this has been true the last couple of new moons. So I believe that that's an important point, that, in the case of the Capricorn new moon, which was at 20 degrees of Capricorn, we're talking about that was a perfect square. So what do we see when we see Eris with Chiron? We see a very thoughtful time, we see a painful time, we see a time when people are beginning to recognize they have to come up with their own way of looking at things in order to have a good life. You can't just go along with the consensus. You have to come up with your own way of seeing, and the fact that it's involved with Chiron, your own sense of the painful situation that the world is in, I believe, is what's important in that. And by the way, another thing that I want to look at in terms of what's happening right now is also the Capricorn solstice chart. I just briefly want to take a look at that and mention a couple of things with it. But for now, it's just important to note, before we leave this chart, that there is this Grand Cross. It does involve Jupiter, which is kind of potentially an optimistic thing. It does involve Haumea, and Haumea has to do with connection to nature. I've been doing a lot of research on these new planets, and it's not only a profound connection to nature, but it's a connection to what we might call natural law, a sense of what's the right thing to do, what's right action, what's right relationship, telling the truth. People with prominent Haumea are very much in the mode of truth-telling and doing the right thing, do unto others as you would like to be treated yourself. It's a very ancient principle. It's a religious principle of all religions, really, in a way. And I think it's important when we're in this new phase of trying to find a new spirituality for these times. I think it's very important to recognize the principle that Haumea brings. And Haumea has been square to Pluto since February, also featured in the new moons since that earlier time, not so much in the latest ones. But so Haumea is very important right now, and it is in this Grand Cross, and we do have Jupiter, and we do have the moon. So, the moon is also something that was prominent in the Capricorn solstice chart. And let's take a look at that chart, just like I said briefly. So here's the Capricorn solstice. So this was when the sun entered the previous sign of Capricorn. Now it's right at the beginning of Aquarius, of course, but that was 30 days ago, well, about 30 days ago. And so here's the sun entering the zero mark of Capricorn, and look where the moon is. The moon had just entered Taurus, 0 degrees. So we have this really close trine, in this case, just by chance, right, between the moon and the sun, also with Jupiter on hand nearby. And I think it's very important to recognize, and of course, Haumea was also part of this configuration, being opposite the moon and Jupiter. This is the chart maybe for the year. The Capricorn solstice chart is important for the coming year, which is our new 2024 year. And what does it tell us that the moon is involved with Haumea and Jupiter? I believe that there is a sign of optimism, as strange as that may sound, in this year, because we do have this sense of the public. I'm also going by what the headlines are telling us. The public having a sense of morality about the situation in the world with various wars that are going on, having a sense of optimism, and maybe we can do a positive change. So that is one message of this Capricorn solstice chart, and I want to keep remembering that and focusing on that as we talk about this full moon. So going back to the full moon chart, same elements as the moon has Jupiter, has this new planet, Haumea, and it has Pluto, which is about transformation and about this new era that we're entering, and what can that be like? And I think the way we can look at this is that public opinion is, as was once said a long time ago when we were trying to avoid the Iraq invasion, public opinion is another superpower in this world if the public is aligned, if people can bring their forces to bear, bring their understanding, bring their not only understanding, but the way that they can articulate that and talk about what's happening and talk about what has to happen and see the suffering and try to make a difference, try to make a change. As you know, the UN is trying to create a ceasefire in Gaza. It's a horrible situation in Gaza. Of course, it was 10/7 was horrible for Israel, and I understand the impulse to strike back, an eye for an eye. But as Gandhi, I believe it was, who said, an eye for an eye eventually makes the whole world blind. And so it's really time to shift our gaze, shift our modus operandi, shift our paradigm, really shift our society towards a different way, towards a culture of kindness that is possible if we all have that vibration going on. And so I think this full moon is a very powerful one. It's a powerful time of reflection on where we're headed in our individual lives, as well as in the life of the culture that surrounds us. And the message of Haumea is that it is important to recognize that we're part of nature, that we're all part of each other. There's no indivisible, there is an indivisible connection between everybody. It's not divided. And we do need to recognize these things, and really the time is getting short for taking care of the earth, as you all know, and for taking care of everybody in it and alleviating suffering where we can encounter it. So that's the message I have for you, and we'll transition back to the other view if I can here and see. So that's what I have for you today. Something to think about, something to recognize in the power of this full moon that's coming up. I think it's a very powerful time. It's a time to reassess. It's a time to look ahead in our own lives and see where we want to take action, what we want to do. All the time, as we're handling our individual situations, I think we need to keep an eye on where the culture is headed, where we're headed with our own lives, and what we do. Everything we do does have a meaning and have a purpose, and it affects everything else. It's it's one thing to sit back and try to stay away from it because we think we're helpless, but in the face of these forces like beyond our control, these political forces, these warlike situations, but the truth of the matter is we're not helpless. The truth of the matter is that we're immensely powerful in concerted action when we all get together. And that's what we have to keep in mind, that our actions do count, that everything we do matters, that we can really make a difference in our individual lives as well as the way that lines up with everything else, the entire collective. So that's it, friends. Have a good one. Take care.